So in the PowerPack for Advanced Steel, and we're taking a look at the railing macro, which comes part of the stairs and railing packages for the PowerPack. So in particular, we're going to look at the connection type, and in the previous versions, we sort of laid the foundation for this, where we were started to look at the hole types within the plate and beam elements. So if I just enable the plate type, the first thing you'll notice is obviously the default will come in looking slightly more organized than it did before with the bolts and the plate arrangement. This has been looked at as well within the overall series of railing tools that we offer. So that's the key clamp railing, the double post railing, as well as obviously the standard railing that I'm looking at here. And we've done that for several different conditions as well. Obviously the top mounted, side mounted, etc. as well, and where appropriate within that connection we've made adjustments. So if we come down to the connection definition as we move in to talk about the different hole types, so under here we have connection definition, and the first change you'll notice is there was a holes tab here, and this is now moved down to here, and it's now called holes definition. And we've restructured this particular page to facilitate the addition of countersunk hole types and threaded type holes as well. And the reason for this is to enable better control for the user. So in the previous version we obviously had round holes and we had slotted holes. And what's happening now is if you use the tree mechanism here, obviously if you're at the top level of the tree and you decide to change the hole type, so for example I'm just going to change this to slotted, you will see in here that obviously everything now has a slotted hole. Now I have made an adjustment in this field because it's become active as well. So if we change that again slightly there, we can see that that is adjusting. And it's not only adjusting just in the plate, it's obviously also put it into the beam underneath. And because we are at the top level of the tree, it has applied it to every element within the branching below that. So obviously you probably don't want to do that in every particular element. So what we're actually going to do is put that back to bolt's default, and you'll see this will change back to the default values. And you probably notice popping up here a little information field that we have when we hover over the information icon, telling you that obviously the values are being pulled from the bolts and anchor editor in the management tool system. Everything's grayed out under the defaults option, as you can see from before. So what I'm going to do is I'm just change to connection plate, and if you wanted again, obviously this is how the tree works. At the top level, apply for every single base plate within the overall railing arrangement. So I'm going to leave that at the moment, but if you wanted to do each segment individually or different types, you could choose that as well. So let's just change that one again there to slotted. And obviously you can see we've got slotted in there, and obviously underneath now in the beam it's still remaining as a round hole. Now what can happen is when you're actually doing this under the connection definition, maybe you have an instance where this might want to be threaded. So let's change this bolt type to setless. And with that, you'll see that the bolt will actually change and the nut is actually removed. So doing that and changing back to the hole definition tab here, so obviously if we come into the input beams now, so obviously we've got each one of these individually under here. So if we come to input beam 1, and we want to change this now to be threaded. So this is one of the new types that we've introduced, and we can see that the threaded field has now become active. And that means you can apply the parameters in here and change this. It will apply some standard parameters that you see, but the user can then define what the threaded parameters should be. And this follows the standard conventions that you would see within Advanced Steel if you chose a threaded hole. Now, similarly, you should be able to use this one, copy from input beam 1, and that'll copy it to there. And then similarly on there, copy from input beam 1. So that's how you replicate it across the different beams. So now we should have that applied to each one. Now obviously it's a bit difficult to obviously see that within here because the threaded hole doesn't really have much of a feature to it. It obviously has values in there depending on what you want to achieve. Those of you familiar with advanced steel will understand how the threaded hole works and the parameters behind that. Okay, so let's go back and let's put everything back to default. So if you have a condition where things are different between the different objects in the railing, you can just come back here, you'll see varies, but let's just pop everything back to the default condition. I'm just going to put that back to nut in there, so I'm going to change that back to where we started from. Now the other thing you might wish to do is obviously use a particular different fixing than what you would be used to using. So you may want to use a countersunk fixing, and again you can use one that's got no nut and washer on it, or you can use one that obviously does have a nut and washer configuration. Now with that you can see obviously there's a countersunk hole now been added in to the top plate. And obviously the beam has got a clearance hole underneath it, and there's a nut and a washer there. So coming to the hole definition, now obviously everything is back to default again, everything is locked down. But if you wanted to come into the connection plate, and again at the top level here, you could facilitate a change. And that is by here, if you select countersink, you'll see that the countersink field is now active. That means you can access these properties in here and change them if you so wish. So if you wanted to have a slightly different countersunk arrangement, maybe you wanted to drop this down a bit, change the depth of it, etc., change the angle arrangement, all the operations that you would see within the standard advanced steel countersunk hole feature are now available in here. Typically with a countersunk bolt, these are pulled through from the management tool system again, and the user would probably not interact at this level or need to change that. So those are the two new types of holes we've added in, and obviously they're working in conjunction with bolt defaults as well. So let's just come back to the connection definition under here, and we can change to any particular bolt that we want in the system. So we can change to a different one here. Now, as you see, that changed, but it didn't pull through the defaults. And the reason for that is because this has been overridden by the user. So what you can do is obviously put that back to bolts default in there, and it'll pull it back in correctly. The same sort of thing here, obviously at that level, everything says bolts default. So if you do get that situation, don't worry about it. It just means that you've made an interaction somewhere and you just need to come back in here and change it back to bolts default. I think another thing to point out to everyone is obviously this works also if you've got a railing that isn't actually connected to anything at all. So maybe it's just drawn to using the line option or point option that we have. So you don't need a supporting body for it, whether it be a piece of concrete or a steel beam in this instance. So in that case, you may choose not to provide the fixings at all and just provide a hole. Now obviously previously when we did this, we were limited to round holes. But obviously now under here, we can actually come in and obviously set the particular type of hole arrangement we want. So in the previous version, we did have round and slotted added in, but we didn't have the options to do countersunk or the threaded arrangement. And as you see, as you change that, the various parts of the page become active. Obviously, other parts of the page remain inactive. If you go to bolts default, also, if you're using holes only, you'll notice that the diameter field is active and not the tolerance field because you're just controlling the size of the hole. Round hole is actually the same in this condition. Obviously, if the bolt default was set to something different, if it was set to countersunk, when you changed your mind, you might want to change this to round, which is why there is a round field within the dialog. So, and this does apply, you can apply it to sloped railings, level railings, however you wish to configure your railing arrangements within your staircases or areas, platforms, etc. This change has been made throughout that process for every type of railing, and that's going back to key clamp railing, double post railing, and obviously the standard. And just to remind everyone that we did take a look at all the various defaults for plates, and we've made adjustments for those again. So just to point that out to everyone, that some of these values you will notice will be different than what you would be used to seeing previously when we were working with this type of arrangement. So to sort of show that again as well, when the user comes into the macro and they choose a connection type, whether it's a top or a side fixing, they would typically have seen an arrangement where the bolts might not have looked very nice in configuration to the rest of the connection. So various parameters within here have been changed. There's quite a few of them, and it does depend on the type of connection you're using, which is obviously based upon the positioning of the post, whether it's to the left or obviously on the top. So hopefully a small couple of improvements there for this version, but should have quite a vast impact into the flexibility of what you can do with the railing tools for this version.